What if Dua Lipa went shoegaze? Let's see if we can find out on this week's What If, How and Why. Hi, my name is Morgan Brown, and every week I release a new What If video on my YouTube channel. The idea of these is that each week I pick a different popular song and imagine an alternative universe in which a change of circumstances causes that song to come out completely different from the version that we know and love. I then take the original lead vocal from that song and record my own backing track to it using just a garage band and whatever instruments I have to hand in order to bring this alternative version to life. So the song I picked this week was Be The One by Dua Lipa, and I attempted to turn that into a shoegaze record. If you haven't had a chance to listen to it yet, here's a little taster. So I'm definitely not any kind of expert on Dua Lipa, and she was around for a good couple of years before I even really heard anything by her at all, I think. First thing I remember hearing from her was happened to catch a bit of an episode of Later with Jules Holland, and she was doing Blow Your Mind brackets Moi on that, which I think was actually her fifth single, but I'd obviously missed the first four at the time. Wasn't super impressed by it. I mean, she certainly had a presence about her, but the song didn't really do anything for me. Didn't think any more about it. Didn't hear anything else for a little bit until sometime later. I think I was in a taxi somewhere and the driver had the radio on and the station played Be The One, which had been a single a couple of years earlier, but at that stage hadn't really done loads, but it'd been a sleeper hit, been bubbling away, and I think finally got reissued and then made the charts in 2017. So that was the first time I'd heard it, and I was just immediately struck by it. I think it's a really unusual and quite captivating pop song, quite hypnotic. It's just got that incredibly simple two-chord structure, but it just draws you in. The production's really atmospheric, and the vocals absolutely spot on it as well. It's just a really perfect 3 minutes of pop, really. Then I was quite excited about Dua Lipa. Unfortunately, nothing else that she's done since has ever quite hit the same for me. There are some good tunes, definitely. I quite enjoyed New Rules with that fun video, and there's been odd bits that have worked for me. But I mean, obviously, for everyone else, she's just gone from strength to strength. That Future Nostalgia album was massive and kind of a big international breakthrough. For me, I could do without more people reviving disco. I think disco's been revived enough, but just because it's not for me doesn't mean it's not for everyone else. Yeah, I couldn't escape that song Levitating for a while, and I always felt like it sounded like it was just assembled from about 6 previously existing disco hits. And also I'm kind of the view that no one who's English should ever use the word sugarboo. Yeah, it just makes me throw up a little bit in my mouth every time I hear that, so sorry. But yeah, it's a massive success anyway. So she's carried on going from strength to strength. I gather that the most recent album, Radical Optimism, hasn't maybe been quite as much of an international commercial success. Obviously, it's still been pretty massive in the UK, and she had the big Glastonbury headline appearance this year, which is cool, but maybe just hasn't kept that momentum going in the States like she might have hoped. I don't know, maybe a change of direction's coming up. I can only hope that there's a bit of a return back to more of that atmospheric, dreamy pop like Be The One, because I don't think she's ever done anything else that's quite like that, and I really love that record. Not actually written by Dua Lipa herself or co-written. It's actually written by Lucy Taylor, Jack Tarrant, and a guy called Nick Gale who goes by Digital Farm Animals. Probably she prefers to work on self-pen material, and I know her background's a bit more in sort of straight pop, R&B leaning stuff, a bit of hip-hop, so maybe dreamy synth pop isn't quite so much her cup of tea, but it's a heck of a song. Whatever she does in the future, I do hope there's like a little hint of that in there somewhere, because that would be awesome. And I think because of that hypnotic, dreamy ambience that the song conjures, that's probably what made me really think that it could be a good candidate for being converted to shoegaze. Shoegaze, it's one of those genres where a lot of the early practitioners of the genre would probably have hated being told that they were part of that. I think like with punk and probably a few other genres. Shoegaze, I guess, originally started out as a pejorative. I guess it comes from people going to see mid-80s post-punk bands and complaining that, oh, the band don't interact with the audience at all. They're just looking down at their feet, gazing down at the guitar pedals. And obviously a whole wave of bands who are particularly categorized by having these kind of floppy fringes that cover their eyes, and then having loads of guitar effects. It was a term that just kind of stuck. A lot of those original bands, My Bloody Valentine, Lush, really weren't terribly keen on the label and would not have really wanted to be considered part of that. But obviously, as a term, it's stuck around, it's kind of catchy and memorable, and I think it's been a long time since anyone's thought of it as any kind of pejorative term. And since then, further generations of bands have picked up on it. There have been revivals, and I think now people would say they're shoegaze as a badge of honour, but I guess going back to the genre's origins in the 80s, people would have just considered themselves to be post-punk bands. Interesting genre, really. I guess grew out of the post-punk and goth movements after the austerity of punk. A lot of bands were just looking to add a bit more colour and texture to their music. Guitarists like John McGeoch, who did great work in Magazine and also Susie and the Banshees, Robert Smith, again in the Banshees and also in The Cure, starting to make these quite exciting, different guitar textures that are a million miles away from just the Johnny Ramone blasting power chords that you tended to get with punk. Other things that would have fed into this emerging movement would be the Jesus and Mary chain, who would have been a massive influence. Really sweet pop melodies, almost naive pop melodies, but with this overwhelming, heavy, trippy wall of feedback backing them up. And then you can't overlook the influence of American bands, Sonic Youth, with their wild, experimental, arty guitar textures, all kinds of strange sounds being wrenched out of these battered old Fender Jaguars and Jazzmasters. And also Dinosaur Jr., Jay Mascis, with his huge walls of sound he wrenches out of that guitar, must have been a massive influence on a lot of those early shoegaze bands. But as a genre, it really definitely emerges out of the UK post-punk scene and characterised really by huge guitars, but not in a traditional rock sense. So guitars being used not to play so much riffs and solos as to create textures and soundscapes. Kevin Shields from My Bloody Valentine was a major influence on this whole wave of guitar players, just the way he used volume and his effects and the tremolo arm on his Jazzmasters to just create these sounds that don't really necessarily even sound remotely like they're coming from a guitar, but just these otherworldly kind of textures. So it's a combination of these unique sort of guitar sounds with quite often quite sweet melodies, often fairly submerged in this huge echoing music, so that the melody's just seeping through this wall of sound. At its best, a really impressive style of music. Not a genre that I ever got really heavily into. I bought Loveless by My Bloody Valentine, which is obviously amazing. I like quite a lot of Lush, although my favourite Lush album is actually Split, which is the one where they were kind of on the cusp between the shoegaze stuff and then becoming more of a straight-ahead pop band. I also really like their straight-up Britpop album they did after that. But I never got too heavily into the rest of it. There are odd bits that I like. I think it's a genre where if the song's good, then the record's going to sound good. But too often people get so focused on the sound that they forget to write a good song. But yeah, when I first actually became aware of the existence of indie music, I guess most of what I was hearing would be shoegaze, maybe with some baggy thrown in, but that kind of turn of the 80s into the 90s era, that was a lot of what would be in the indie chart. And it was really quite the dominant form for British guitar music for a little while there, until obviously the rise of Britpop, at which point so many of these shoegaze bands either just died off or tried to radically overhaul their sound to fit in with the prevailing sound. So, as I mentioned, Lush became pretty much just a straight-ahead pop band for that last album. Quite successfully as well, I should say. Whereas Ride, another massive shoegaze band, also tried to turn into more of a laddish sort of rock band in the Oasis mould with much less success. So it seemed for a little while there like shoegaze was completely done. My Bloody Valentine were on what seemed like indefinite hiatus. No one had seen Kevin Shields for years, and most of these bands had either veered off course or just vanished. But it's interesting how a few years later you just started to see elements of that creeping into other people's music, notably areas where you wouldn't expect it, like in metal, where you get, for instance, the Deftones start to make use of shoegazy kind of guitar textures in their music, and then bits of it start to crop up in punk rock. If you think of Fucked Up, who started as more of a straight ahead hardcore band, but by the time they're releasing records like Chemistry of Common Life and David Comes to Life, they're starting to record much longer songs with these three guitars intertwining, creating these fascinating textures, using all kinds of effects. And that must be quite a lot of shoegaze influence in there. And that's continued to other bands. Thinking of people like a band I really like in the UK DIY scene in recent years, Cult Dreams. They're this great duo who the content of their songs is very much in a socio-political punk vein, but musically it's again massive shoegazy kind of guitar textures. And then in recent years we've seen bands reviving more of a pure shoegaze sound and then also combining it with even more styles of music. There's a whole subgenre of black metal called black gaze now. Bands like Alcest who combine that bleak, cold imagery of black metal with these huge epic textures of shoegaze, which is a combination that works remarkably well. So for a genre that seemed like it was pretty much done by the mid-90s, it's really roared back into life. So my thought for a reason for this week's song to exist in my alternative universe scenario was, in this alternative universe we go back to 2015. Dua Lipa's pretty much just starting out on her journey as a musician. She's released the first couple of singles. They haven't done too much just yet, but she's touring hard. She's got a band. She's going out on the road and she's sound checking, playing Be The One, which has just been her recent single. Slips over on stage and lands on her guitarist. I think it was Kai Smith. He's definitely played for her. I don't know if it would have been in those days, but that's what I guessed. Lands on a guitarist pedal board, accidentally turning on all the pedals at once, which creates this otherworldly noise like no one's ever heard before. Obviously, she's a bit embarrassed to have had this accident, but at the same time, she's like, oh, what's that noise? Is there any way we could incorporate that sound into this song? And the guitar player's like, oh, you mean like a shoegaze kind of thing? And having grown up listening to pop music and R&B, she's not familiar with the term at all, but he explains it to her, gives her a couple of names to look up. So she goes away back to a hotel room and starts listening to things, doing a bit of reading up, and becomes completely captivated by this. And, mega into Slowdive and Chapter House and all these bands. So when it comes time to go back to the studio and carry on working on her debut album, she decides, no, we're overhauling everything. It's all going to be based on this kind of music that I now love. So everything's just covered in these big layers of guitar textures. The vocals are bathed in this reverb to make them sound so much more dreamy. And she re-records Be The One to be the flagship single of her new sound. And it's a big hit and spearheads a new kind of mainstream shoegaze revival. So it was an interesting process attempting to actually turn Be The One into a shoegaze song. As ever, started out by just taking Dua's lead vocal and popping it into GarageBand. I think I did mess with the tempo a little bit, and I also, when I was programming the drums on, I went for a half-time feel from the original. So pop some drums on it. The drums aren't particularly showy, they just drive along pretty steadily and just keep this mid-tempo feel going. The bass, likewise, isn't anything too elaborate. It just really there to underpin everything without being too showy in any respect. It's the guitars that are going to do the heavy lifting in this arrangement. So there are lots of guitars. I started out with a pair of cleanish rhythm guitars with just lots of chorus on, which I panned left and right. And I think they go all the way through, just strumming away pretty regularly on the chords. And then halfway through each verse, I bring in a pair of fuzz guitars playing softly. And then when the choruses come in, they launch into big fuzzy chords. And then on top of that, I have another pair of guitars which are playing through the verse. They play these volume swells with a sort of whammy bar dive bomb kind of tailing off. The dive bomb, but definitely not in any kind of heavy metal way. So it's just this sighing, kind of gentle, slightly ethereal sound I was going for. And then those tracks, when we get into the chorus, just start playing these sort of unison bends, which is a thing I've heard in quite a lot of shoegazy things, particularly crops up in Kevin Shields playing quite a lot, so I thought I'd try and get some of those in. And and those guitars are just as mangled with effects as I could manage, really. So just kind of try and create a bit of ebb and flow, building from these fairly gentle verses to these massive choruses, and then the final chorus, I'd bring in an extra layer of huge fuzz guitar, which just goes right down the center of the stereo field. And I also added in a fuzz pedal on the bass just to give that an extra low growl as well. So that last chorus is just huge. One thing that was a little bit of a challenge with trying to make it sound more shoegazy, obviously just the strength of Dua Lipa's vocal. She's got quite a distinctive and quite a powerful voice, quite low in register in a way. It's a sort of alto register, quite husky and soulful, which isn't really the sound that you generally get in a lot of shoegaze bands. It's not the sort of wispy ethereal thing that you might expect to hear, but I just treated it with quite a lot of reverb and then just sat it as low as possible in the mix without it completely vanishing. I think it suits the tone of the song pretty well, just the way it is there. So it was my first attempt at doing anything vaguely shoegazy. I hope it sounds kind of like it belongs in that genre. For the video, I started out as usual with just some performance footage of the original song. Annoyingly got about 2/3 of the way through editing the video, and then the file was corrupted and I couldn't use that anymore, so I had to swap to a different performance partway through, but what are you going to do? And then blend it in with a mixture of the usual mocked up gig posters showing Dua Lipa on the bill with assorted shoegaze luminaries, and then also some really cool old performance footage of Slowdive, which is particularly good because not only do the band look exactly like you want a shoegaze band to look, but it's filmed with a lot of those kind of trippy visual effects that really capture the feel of those late 80s, early 90s music videos that all the shoegaze bands had back in the day. So I think that came together pretty well as well. So let me know what you think. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Also, if there's anything else you'd like me to try in coming weeks, any songs you'd like me to have a look at, any artists you'd like me to investigate, or any genres you'd like me to try my hand at, please do let me know. I always enjoy a challenge. But yeah, otherwise, that's it from me for this week. So thanks very much for watching. I'll see you next time.